Life is full of changes. Just think about your own life. You're in high school now, but how much have you changed since kindergarten? You've likely gone through a few different phases in your life and changed your style up a bit.
Yeah, Mom, I need more hair glue for my spikes. I'm punk rock now.
And that person you had a crush on in 7th grade, well, chances are you've moved on. Yeah, life changes and you change. We're human, it happens. Well, our old friend the United States has also gone through some changes. And for a massive nation, it's not as simple as having to break it to your old middle school love interest that, wow.
I'm just not that into you anymore.
When the US goes through phases, millions of people are affected. Our lesson today focuses on how the United States has used different policies when dealing with foreign governments and entities. Our central question asks, how did American foreign policy change throughout the 19th and 20th centuries? Our guiding questions are, at different points in its history, why did the United States adopt policies of isolationism and interventionism and imperialism? Okay, historians, let's go. Let's start by identifying some key terms. First of all, as you learned in the lesson Westward Expansion, foreign policy includes government strategies aimed at dealing with other nations and can involve economic, political, and military actions. The first type of foreign policy we'll discuss is isolationism. Isolationism refers to when a country seeks to minimize its involvement in international affairs, focusing primarily on domestic concerns. If we were looking at the US as a teenager going through phases, this would be the leave me alone, I want to be in my room by myself phase. There are many reasons why a country would practice isolationism. Here are just a few. Isolationism protects a country from potential harmful outside influences. It prevents a country from becoming embroiled in complex international disputes. It also allows a country to focus on internal improvements rather than becoming distracted by external affairs. Now let's examine a period of relative isolationism for the United States in the early 20th century. The year was 1796. The nation had just finished fighting a major war for independence, and it was finding its footing as a new country. Let's hear what outgoing President George Washington urged future leaders in his farewell address.
The great rule of conduct for us in regards to foreign nations is to have with them as little political connection as possible. It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world.
Take a minute to pause the video and decode this quote in your own words in your PDF. Here, President Washington urged future leaders to avoid making partnerships with foreign countries. He knew that the United States government needed to grow up a bit before it became entangled with other nations' interests. This philosophy was maintained by future presidents into the early 1800s. Usually, the U.S. refused to get involved in international disputes, even when they impacted the national economy. This isolationist stance was reinforced 2 decades later in 1823. Several countries in Latin America, the region pictured on this map, had recently gained independence from Spain and Portugal. The United States was concerned that these fledgling nations weren't yet strong enough to defend themselves, and that European countries would recolonize them. This would move these European powers geographically close to the US, which the US saw as a threat. Thus, President James Monroe formalized isolationism with the Monroe Doctrine, which issued a warning for Europe to stay out of Latin America while promising that the US would stay out of European affairs. And it worked! The doctrine was effective in deterring further European colonization in the Americas. While European powers still maintained their existing colonies, they generally did not attempt to establish new ones after the doctrine's announcement. Thus, the United States maintained a stance of relative isolationism until the 1840s. However, it's important to note that isolationism during this period was primarily focused on avoiding political and military entanglements, not economic isolation. The US was engaged in global trade, and maritime commerce was a vital part of the nation's early economy. And, as you already know, the country expanded westward during this time, encountering Native American civilizations along the way. The US used military force and treaties to take land from these indigenous nations. So, while the US was not isolationist in the strictest sense, its foreign policy in the early 19th century was marked by a strong preference for non-involvement in international politics and conflicts among the larger world powers of the day, particularly those of Europe. So, let's review. Why did the United States adopt a policy of isolationism? Now let's consider foreign policy phases of interventionism and imperialism. Interventionism refers to a policy in which a country actively intervenes in the affairs of other nations to promote its own interests or to influence global events. Imperialism is the policy or practice of extending a country's power and influence to dominate other territories through various means, such as colonization or indirect control. Imperialism goes beyond interventionism, as it involves dominating the target country and taking its resources. If we were looking at the US as a teenager going through phases, interventionism is the phase of, my sister wants to redecorate her room but has no sense of design. I'm going to help her with her decisions. Imperialism is the phase of, I'm just going to occupy my sister's room and take what I want from it because I'm older and bigger. Yeesh. A country would likely already have internal stability if it chooses to intervene in the affairs of other countries. This involvement could stem from various motivations. The country might aim to safeguard its economic interests, or it might wish to promote its political or social ideologies, such as democracy or communism. Additionally, it could offer humanitarian aid to another country facing a crisis. A country might imperialize other lands when it is seeking economic or political gain. This aggressive tactic is typically executed when the imperializing country feels that it is significantly stronger than its target. Imperialism may be justified by a sense of moral and ideological superiority, and a belief that the target country is deficient in some way and that the imperial force can elevate the local population. During the mid to late 19th century, the United States adopted a policy of interventionism and, at times, imperialism. One example of interventionism was the annexation of Texas. In the 1840s, many residents of Texas, which had recently separated from Mexico, believed that joining the United States would provide greater security, economic opportunities, and political stability. The U.S. intervened and annexed the territory in 1845, even though Mexico wished to regain control of it as well. An example of imperialism was the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848, which you learned about in the lesson Westward Expansion. The war resulted in part of the U.S.'s move to annex Texas. The United States won, gaining a great deal of western land in the process. Another example of imperialism was the Spanish-American War. At the time, the U.S. was seeking ways to expand outside continental North America. The United States wanted to compete with European powers, who were vastly increasing their wealth and economic influence by imperializing Africa. The U.S. saw an opportunity to strike in 1898. Just 90 miles from the United States, Cuba was seeking independence from Spain, but Spain had squashed the liberation movement with its harsh treatment of the rebels. The US said that Spain's actions were inhumane and that intervention was required to protect the Cuban people. Additionally, the US felt that it had the license to act. The Monroe Doctrine, written over 70 years before and intended as an isolationist policy, warned Europe not to interfere anywhere in the Western Hemisphere. The increased Spanish activity in Cuba was considered interference and was used to justify the United States stepping in, which is what they did. While intervening to liberate the Cuban people, the United States also turned the war into an imperialistic mission, quickly defeating Spain and taking control of the former Spanish colonies of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. The United States continued its policy of interventionism into the 20th century. President Theodore Roosevelt issued the Roosevelt Corollary in 1904, which extended the Monroe Doctrine and asserted that the United States had the right to intervene in the affairs of Latin American countries to maintain stability and protect U.S. economic interests. The U.S. had assumed the role of enforcer in the Americas. Let's review. Why did the United States adopt policies of interventionism and imperialism? So, perhaps just like you, the United States has also gone through phases when it comes to wanting to be left alone or wanting to get out there and start something. But more has changed about the US than its foreign policy. Quite a bit has taken place within these borders as well. That's what you'll learn about next time. But until then, keep making history.
Hey, hey.